Welcome to another episode of the Meal Prep Monday podcast. I'm your host and founder of Prep Dish, Allison Schaaf. Today, we are doing a deep dive into evening versus morning hours. Before we dive into today's episode, I have a quick testimonial from Micah in Tennessee, a Prep Dish customer who says, "You've made kitchen life fun. Brought an educational element and flavor to a new level. I now have more confidence than ever in the kitchen, and it is growing through my participation and commitment. My family of 6 and I are eating healthier than ever before, and I know in a couple more months we will lavish in wellness you bring in our table in life. I find prep days long, but the dish stay and flavor worth the work. I look forward to my weekly menus and meal planning. You make life simple for me, and for that, I greatly appreciate what you do for our family. The biggest thank you for what you and your team do is making a difference in our lives today and for the future." Thank you for sharing, Micah, and I'm so glad that you and your family are enjoying Prep Dish. I appreciate you letting us know. It's always fun to hear from customers and how Prep Dish is working for you. If you are not a current Prep Dish customer and would like to try it out for 2 weeks for free, you can head to prepdish.com/MPM, short for Meal Prep Monday, and try us out for 2 weeks for free. I always say that's the best way to see if it's a fit. Just give it a try for 2 weeks and see how it works in your life. That link, prepdish.com/MPM, is also going to be in the show notes. Okay, so today's episode, I want to talk a little bit. You can probably tell I have little kids at home. I like to talk about sleep, but I do have kids that are now sleeping through the night. So the conversation is a little more fun than it used to be when they were younger. But I've recently heard someone, I don't even know where I heard it, but they were talking about, evening hours versus morning hours, and basically looking at it as if you go to bed earlier and wake up earlier, essentially what you're doing is swapping out some evening time for some morning time. And that really got me thinking, okay, what am I doing in the evenings and what am I doing in the mornings? And before I go kind of more in depth into that, I also wanted to touch briefly on something called sleep chronotypes, I think is what it's usually referred to as, but it's like these different animals, and everyone in the population can kind of fit into one of 4 different categories. Most of the population is called a bear. And I'm going to try and find, I think that sleep book I read might have mentioned this, but the person who coined these chronotypes, I'm pretty sure there's a TEDx video. So if I can find that, I'll link that in the show notes. But if you just Google it, it's kind of all over now, like these different chronotypes. So for example, I know my husband is a bear, which is kind of the typical population. Like you go to bed at 11, you wake up at 7, most productive like midday. But then there's also dolphins, which are a little more sporadic. Wolves that stay up a little later and sleep in a little later and are productive kind of later in the day. And then there's what's called the lion. I actually used to think it was the lark, but I guess it's the lion that goes to sleep at 9 and wakes up at 5 and is most productive from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. So I just wanted to point out these chronotypes before getting into the episode, because my chronotype, I think very clearly, is the lion. Like I am a morning person. I have been since I was a toddler. I remember my mom saying that when she was pregnant with my younger sisters, I would just wake up and like play in her room while she slept. She was never a lion, and I always was. So I remember always my whole life waking up before my parents, during the week, on the weekends. I've just always been the early riser in the house. So I do want to throw that out there though, because when I'm talking about kind of swapping out these evening and morning hours, keep in mind, I also tend to be a person that thrives more in the morning hours. So if that's not you, then maybe when you listen to how I'm looking at these hours, you actually look at it through a different lens of like when you are most productive. So I think the information can be relevant even if you are not a lion. I think the important part is in kind of just evaluating what's happening in these hours. So for me, when I'm looking at my evening hours, and this was happening kind of when we were in this like back to school time zone, although I noticed gosh, on the calendar, it just popped up that as I'm recording this, the time change is coming. When this airs, it may have already happened. I'm not sure, but I feel like this the time change happens. I know it's only twice a year. It feels like more than that. But, anytime that there is either a time change or a new schedule or, the start of school or start of summer, kind of reevaluating what time I'm going to bed, what time the kids are going to bed is so important. And we did that with the start of the school year. One thing that we did do is during the summer, so after the time change in the spring, and then especially in the summer, our kids just started going to bed late. I was always one that had my kids in bed by like 7:30 at the latest, and we never stayed up late. And this summer, it just completely went out the window. I mean, not only was it not a 7:30 bedtime, but usually it was like closer to 9. So it just like jumped like an hour and a half through the summer. And as we started to get back into the school year, I know that in the past they've really thrived with that early evening bedtime of like 7:30. And I was listening, I think there was a book that she was talking about that. And I was like, why don't I just try it again? So I decided, I was like, we're just going to change. We're going to go back to 7:30 and see if we can, make it happen. And we did. So they actually very much, and it's not perfect, but we try and aim for that between 7:30 and 8 p.m. bedtime. And they really do well with it. So yeah, I guess it just in the summer we had a different mindset and we were able to swap that. So I would say if you have had that experience of the bedtime creeping later, give it a shot, and maybe is that they have changed and, they're in a different stage and that's not appropriate anymore. But for mine, I was able to actually shift it easier than I thought I would be able to. I was actually nervous that it would not work, but it did. And then in evaluating my time and what time I was going to bed, I have always loved an early bedtime so that I could then wake up early. But with the kids going to bed later this summer, I had started going to bed later. And so when I shifted their bedtime to this earlier time, I decided to try and shift mine a little bit as well. And what I realized is what this really cut into is in the evening time, what am I doing? And I am not someone like, after 5 o'clock, I don't really open my computer back up, at least not for work. Like I'm not going to be doing emails or work or anything like that. I just am not functioning very well in that, in like a work capacity at night. My nighttime activities, sometimes it's tidying, right? Like cleaning up the kitchen, tidying up the living room. So there is some of that that's happening. But then from there, I am often finding a TV show, watching that. So I made a list. One of the other things is, spending time with my husband. But I do find, honestly, after a certain time, we're both tired. So I don't feel as if we're actually getting a lot of quality time after the kids go to bed. We also have to be really quiet, or sometimes I end up just going to bed the same time they do, because otherwise, they're just running out to be with us. So, that's a lot of what's happening in the evening is not, and, I love to read, but I find I don't do as good of a job of reading in the evening. Sometimes I'll do like Audible or a podcast. So I'll listen to things a lot. Like I'll just kind of like lay down and rest my eyes and listen to something. Whereas in the morning, if I wake up earlier, I tend to do things like I meditate and I journal and I do read. Like that's when I read my hard copy books. Like I'll open up a book and read more in the morning versus in the evening. Again, not saying it never happens one or the other, but I am more likely to do that. And in the morning, I don't think I've ever once woken up and been like, oh, I'm just going to like watch a TV show right now in the morning. I'm always doing something kind of more productive. And, also like going for a walk. If I wake up really early and no one's awake, I'll get my walk in early. I, start making breakfast and things like that. So for me, I realized, gosh, if I can go to bed 30 minutes earlier and wake up 30 minutes earlier, it's really cutting out the things that I'm not wanting to do as much of anyway. And it's allowing for more time to do those things in the morning. The other thing I will note is I have my youngest, he's very much like me. He's probably what did I say I was? The lion. I'm guessing he's a lion as well. Even if I wake up at 5 or 5:30, probably half the time he hears me and he runs out to be with me. And so all of those plans of meditating and journaling, some of them, they sometimes just fly out the window. So I've had to not be attached to the fact that if I wake up early, it automatically means I'm going to get X amount of time and X amount of things done, because there is always the chance that he hears me and comes and joins me. But that's also better quality time with him at 6 a.m. than it is at 8 p.m. If he's spending time with me and I'm up at 8 p.m. or 8:30, then it's just kind of like you're thinking, oh my gosh, get to bed. And it's not as quality a time. So that kind of again points to kind of the earlier bedtime and earlier wake time. The other thing that I'll note that I've started doing in the evenings is just sort of a morning prep. So I have, I drink lemon water and a specific tea, a Tulsi tea in the morning. And so I just kind of get all of that out. Like once the kitchen's picked up, I have a little corner where I set out everything I'm going to need for in the morning. I also do tongue scraping. I don't know if anyone's into this, but I swear by it. It is like, to me, even more essential than brushing your teeth. You can look into it. I'm not going to go into detail, but that's another part of my morning routine. But I get all of that set up in the evening. So that way in the mornings, it really does go a lot more smoothly. And again, less chance that the kids hear me and then I wake them up because I'm able to be a little quieter if I don't have to do as many things. And I'll even set out the breakfast. Like if I know we're going to have oatmeal, I'll put the oatmeal in the rice cooker and put it there. So then when I wake up, all I have to do is like hit the little on button and the oatmeal starts, and then we'll be ready by the time the kids wake up. So that's where I'm at right now with kind of just reevaluating those evening and morning hours and realizing, hey, maybe if I cut my evening a little shorter and wake up a little earlier, I tend to have a better day where I fit in more of the things that I'm wanting to fit in. So hopefully you have some takeaways here in terms of evaluating your time spent in those kind of late evening hours and early morning hours and what's happening in those hours. And if you can swap one way or the other, the chronotypes might be a good place to start as well, just to kind of go into it knowing where you're at in terms of ideal bedtime and wake up time as well. So that is all I have for this week. A reminder that if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, I would really appreciate a rating and review, or if you know someone that would enjoy this episode or other episodes, if you could just do a quick screenshot and send it to them. It just helps other people to find this podcast. And I really appreciate when you share that with others. And if you want to try out our time-saving meal prep meal plans, you can head to prepdish.com/MPM. Try it out for 2 weeks for free. See if it's a fit for you. That is all I have for this week. I will be back again next Monday with another episode.